Here we go. We are probably now live. Welcome to this dialogue, this online dialogue jointly organized by ERIA and the CIE.co. And we are going to discuss about innovation and digitalization in the agricultural sector with experts from ASEAN and India. We are very lucky today because we have a fantastic lineup of speakers and an extremely knowledgeable moderator. I'm Giulia Monemarsan, Area Director for Strategy and Partnership at ERIA. Before introducing our moderator today, let me just remind you to please keep your microphone on mute during the discussion, but feel free to interact with us and especially the speakers throughout the chat box. And we are going to use your questions during the Q&A segment towards the end. So please feel free to make the discussion interactive throughout the different channels. We are very lucky to have today with us Hemendra Mathur, who is going to be the moderator of the discussion today. He has over 25 years of experience in venture capital, private equity, management consulting, and investment banking in India and also South Asia, Europe, and the US. Also, a very long experience in early stage and growth capital investing. Also very much in the area we're going to discuss today, food supply chain, food technologies. And also he advised through his management consulting career, many different actors, in the food and agribusiness also, but also retail and consumer good industry, corporates, but also the government of India and state governments. Thank you very much, Hemendra, for being with us, and over to you now.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks for this wonderful opportunity. And I welcome all the panelists and the participants to this webinar. We have a very interesting topic for the day, which is innovation and digitization in agtech. And I'm really fortunate to have a very stellar panel with me today, who each one of them actually is an expert on the subject. So I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting discussion. Let me take a couple of minutes to introduce them briefly. We can start with Dr. Venkatachalam Anbumoji. Dr. Venkat is Director of Research, Strategy and Innovation at ERIA. Dr. Venkat has published several books, authored numerous research articles, and produced many project reports on resource management policies, energy infrastructure design, and private sector participation. Anbu, welcome to this forum. We're fortunate to have you. Then we have Richie. Can we have Richie? Richie is Chief Marketing Officer and Director of People and Culture at Tani Hub Group, Indonesia. Tani Hub, I'm sure most of us are familiar with, is one of the most, I would say, scaled up startup in Indonesia, one of the most vertically integrated supply chain startup that I know of. And Richie himself is a startup growth scaler, an e-commerce business leader with previous experience in early stage, high growth startups, technology corporations, management consulting, and FMCG brand management across multiple countries, including Southeast Asian markets. Welcome, Richie, to the session. Then we have Luke Tay. He is independent food futurist. He's joining us from Singapore. Luke's foresight research addresses the interlinked future of food, transport, and urban systems, and of international development and cross-border food investments in the context of advancing technology, shifting geopolitics, and evolving Earth system. So I think we have a pretty good speaker with us in Luke. Luke, welcome to this forum. And we have a very young startup joining us from India, Sai Gol. She is the co-founder of Bharat Agri. Bharat Agri is a startup which provides systematic solution and consultancy calendar to the farmers based on the data collected from Bharat Agri's algorithms. The startup offers critical inputs to farmers on what to grow, when to grow, how to grow, when to water, when to provide fertilizer, etc., etc. So it's done a phenomenal job working directly with farmers. They have over 15 lakh users, apart from 50,000 paid farmers. So phenomenal achievements. I welcome to this forum. Next, we have is Emmanuel Murray, Senior Advisor at Caspian Impact Investment, a good friend and a staunch supporter of agri-tech ecosystem in India. He's been mentoring a lot of startups. And of course, at Caspian, he's involved in both equity and debt fund investments. The role he's playing at Caspian is to support the ecosystem development through working with incubators and startups in the food and agri space. Apart from mentoring, he also provides support in market linkages and credit linkages to the startups. Emmanuel, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Hemant.
Right, so I think we have all the speakers with us. Let's get started with the discussion. I know, that we have a good set of speakers and they'll talk about it, but let me just take about a minute or two to set the context. Innovation and digitization, I think it's a very important topic. And of course, there are two different themes. But if we talk about agri-tech, and especially me coming from India, all I can say there's a lot of overlap between innovation and digitization that we see in India, because 90% of agri-tech in India is digital. And clearly, what we have seen in last 5 years, especially, is phenomenal in the way the food supply chain is becoming more and more digitized. And what this digitization is doing is essentially making supply chain demand-driven, transparent, efficient, linking farmers with the markets in a much more efficient way, decompressing the supply chain. Typically, the intermediaries in the supply chain are like anywhere between 5 to 10 between the farmer and the consumer. But with more digitization, we are seeing also a lot of disintermediation. And that is really changing the way the whole agricultural supply chain has been existing for a long time, which was essentially supply driven. And with data and digitization coming into play, it is becoming more and more demand driven. Who's driving digitization? So I must say that, of course, there are multiple players, but the key players are agri-tech startups. In India, we have more than 1,000 agri-tech startups working in this space, and the number is growing, I would say, exponentially from year on year. There were hardly any startups 10 years back. They were probably 50 to 100 5 years back, and now we have 1,000. And I'm very confident in next 10 years, probably there'll be 10,000 agri-tech startups in the country. And they are, of course, one of the key, I would say, anchor for driving digitization through their innovative solution, which is enabling farmers to access markets, to access good quality inputs, to access data, advisory, to access institutional credit, to access insurance. So most of the challenges which farmers typically have, especially smallholder farmers that we see in our country, I think can be solved with use of interesting digital tools. And at the same time, I would say government is also playing a very important role. Government of India has launched Indian digital ecosystem for agriculture. It's called IDEA, and it's essentially to create a pan-India agri-stack, digitizing farm, linking it to farmer ID, so that it creates an instant access to the farmer, which is so important for any startup or any ecosystem player to reach out to farmers. So, and of course, we are seeing a lot of tailwinds. I'm sure that is true for other Southeast Asian and ASEAN countries as well, in terms of increasing penetration of smartphones, increasing bandwidth, access to 4G and potentially 5G in time to come, access to broadband. There are 600,000 villages in the country, and government has an ambitious plan to connect each and every village through a broadband network, which can really change the adoption by farmers. So there are a lot of tailwind that we see. Having said that, yes, the adoption among farmers has to go up significantly. There are challenges on scale, on sustainability of these models. So that's what we are going to discuss today in our webinar. And maybe I can start with our first speaker, Anbu. My first question to you is, if you look at ERIA's research on framework on circular economy that was recently adopted by ASEAN Economic Community, could you tell us what agricultural technology means to ASEAN circular economy and how it can support the goal of sustainable economy of ASEAN?
Thank you, Hemendra, and good evening to all my panelists, fellow panelists, and also participants. ASEAN Economic Community has adopted this long-term circular economy framework in the June 30th. It has the priorities, or it has the objectives of bringing. First one is that resource efficiency to the farms. Second is the resilience of the value chain, and third is the competitiveness. This is what circular economy aims to achieve. But in circular economy is a kind of a restorative one, which aims to maintain the utility of the products, components, and retain their value along the value chain. In this regard, the main characteristics of the circular economy will differ from sector to sector, but this is more applied to agriculture sector, which, for example, produces nearly 70% of the post-harvest losses. And if you go to the rural areas, this agricultural residues and the waste crop residues, and also this increasing the productivity. These are the main challenges where this adopting the circular economy model will bring these multiple benefits. And this ASEAN Economic Communities framework on the circular economy is built upon the three narratives. One is this economic interest for increasing the competitiveness, so that is the resource input from one farm could be transformed into a output for the other farm. Second thing is the environmental concerns. How to reduce this pressure on the environment and also tackling the climate change. Third one is also the cooperative regulatory requirement. These three are the basic narratives for taking this ASEAN circular economy framework. But it has these strategic priorities of 5 areas. One is the categorization of the circular products and services. This is more applicable to agrarian economies like Cambodia and Myanmar and Laos. Second thing is this also believes in continued trade openness in the goods and services. And third strategic priority is enhancing the role of innovation, digitalisation, and the emerging technologies. This circular economy framework has applied to these agriculture technologies, which could be classified into hard technologies and the soft technologies. When I say the hard technologies, these are the technologies that produce, that contribute for the enhanced productivity. And the soft technologies that include that kind of e-commerce platforms and the financial inclusion technologies that support kind of a transition for maximizing the resource use. Here we find this framework applies, there are 3 enabling frameworks. One is that is the policy framework and that enabling institutions. And second thing is enhance the awareness and the competitiveness across the sectors. And third one is this industry 4.0 or the digital economy. And third one is the partnership and the collaboration. So if you apply and this 4 enablers and the concept of the circular economy, and we find this is a very interesting phenomena, and where this concept of agriculture circular economy could contribute for the urban resilience and as well as the rural areas productivity increase. But we did have a kind of 2 different set of approaches, and here we need a kind of a new type of an ecosystem where our studies indicated. Basically, we studied some of the best practices in Thailand and Vietnam, and we found an ecosystem for this circular economy and the agriculture green economy has the 3-tier approach. The first tier is the kind of a lower tier. We have a kind of a common technologies, common primitive technologies that should include or integrate this ICT technologies with the other infrastructure, and for example, transport and the productivity increase, the application of the drones and remote sensing technologies, And under the middle level, and we find more integration of platforms like business to business and the business to consumer platforms, where the digital data and the hardware technologies and the software technologies are integrated together. And then the third one is that there's a top layer where we need a high-tech technology. So that has a kind of a new type of model, that is a kind of extended enterprise model, where this is the local firms and the multinational companies come together and they create a platform where this application of the digital technologies contribute for the circularity of the principles. And here we found, and particularly this framework has been now we are working on the implementation framework. And here we find that most interesting or the most essential thing is developing the public-private partnership. And here we find long-term resource efficiency is very much needed, and then region-wide coordination is needed at the macro level. And more very much what we are focusing at the particularly these least developed countries, which are the agrarian economies, is kind of three kind of necessities. One is that is the inclusion, that is where that is these digital technologies and these new business models can bring that inclusivity. And the second thing is the integrity, that is data integration with these hardware technologies. Third one is the innovation. That is, innovation includes the financial innovation and the technological innovation and the policy innovations. So I stop here and I will come back to you if you have any specific.
Thanks, Anbu. It's a phenomenal amount of work that you have done as part of this paper. And I'm so happy that you highlighted the role of partnerships and collaboration. I think that's one of the key pillars for growth of innovation in this sector. And the partnership that I see, which are extremely critical, clearly partnership between startups and the farmers and the farmer groups like farmer producer organization, but also partnership with village level entrepreneurs, partnership with district administration, partnership with state governments, partnership with policymakers, industry, corporates. I think you need all that pieces in place to really scale the solutions. And I think with that observation, I'll go to Sai. Sai, you've been doing a fantastic job at Bharat Agri, working directly with farmers. One of the very few startups in India that I see which are direct to farmer. And would love to learn from your experience. How do you, what kind of impact your solution has created in the value chain, especially on the farmers? And how do you scale this solution from one state to another state, from one crop to another? What opportunities and challenges you see in that?
Thank you, Amendra, for this opportunity and for a really good question. So majorly the impact which we have created is introduction of all these farmers to a digital interface, which they were not aware or they didn't have any opportunity of getting exposed to. And that opened a plethora of different services for farmers, not just for farming, but anything and everything around farming, which they have a better access. Earlier, at least in tier 2 and tier 3 or tier 4 and down places in India, there has been a monopoly or duopoly with respect to brands, or there has been influence of only local dealers or retailers with respect to agriculture. Now, this is true for input, this is true for anything which has to do on farm, and also for output, like right from sowing till harvest. But now we have been able to provide them a platform where they have an information access from sowing to harvest and market for anything and everything. And that is not a one type of information. That information is across. We want to make sure we are enabling the farmers with the right information. So that was our initial thought process in even starting Bharat Agri. We realized that few things which are very common to us, like whenever we have a problem, we try to go to internet and try to Google or use some search browser to search about that problem. That particular habit is not there in farmers because of lot of things, because of their different behavior. But at the same time, even if, let's say, if I ask farmer to go and Google or use a search browser, the information itself is not available on internet. So there has to be a very different level of information, first of all, available. And again, that information, so when I as an urban user go to internet, I try to personalize that information for myself, what is applicable to me. Whereas since in rural aspect and in agriculture aspect, that information is not available, personalization is like still 10-20 years away. Like at least in 2017 when we started, personalization was not even existing for agriculture. So that was a thought process in, first of all, bringing information to farmers, and secondly, bringing a personalization to them so that they can ready-made use that information without giving it a thought. Because of the education level, because of access to systems, access to different infrastructure in at least Indian farming community, it is difficult to ask them to assess that information and take a decision. What we wanted to be was a decision-making partner for the farmer, where we are processing all the information, because in agriculture, there are so many variables. There are economic variables, weather, then there is, particular crop has particular crop, then soil, lot of different variables are there. So this is just the vertical branches of variables I have told. In all these vertical branches, there are several variables. So this is something, it is very difficult for a farmer to process and take a decision. So that's what we could bring a innovative factor to table to farmers, and we have been successfully able to work with farmers, make sure that we are able to increase their production by 40 to 50%. The farmers who are using our personalized advisory, they are able to see that, because we are optimizing everything end to end. There are more than 50 different variables which we continuously track for the farmer. At the same time, we also optimize everything which goes into their farming activity, right? From labors, water, to input fertilizers, to everything that is also is getting optimized. And there we see at least 10 to 15% reduction in cost of production. So this is what we have been able to bring to the farmers. Now, when you were saying like, how do we expand to different states? So like I told, personalization is one of the very key aspect of our advisory, and that is one of the gap which we have been seeing in Indian farming community or Indian farmers. So, digital penetration helped us. At the same time, when we started, farmers were not using mobile. We had 2017, when we were going to farmers and telling them, can you use at least our SMS advisory service? They were like, no, like we don't believe in this thing. So we have seen all that part. We have gone through a place where farmers were not using a feature phone, to today our farmers use iPhone, and we have only Android application, and our farmers come to us and they say, when are you developing an iOS application? So this tremendous progress we have seen in last 5 years. But vernacular is something which has helped us a lot. We try to be as personalized with respect to content. At the same time, we have to gauge farmers' comfort. Even you have the best advisory, if the farmer is not comfortable in understanding and accepting it, he will not use it. So that personal comfort level with respect to regional content, with respect to vernacular content, that is something which we have been able to deliver across 10 different states in India. And going forward also, we'll be expanding to all states in India and also Southeast Asia. That time our approach will be the same.
Thanks, Sai, and really good luck with your expansion. And really, it's transformative from from a feature phone, no SMS, to iPhone. I think, and that too in 5 years. So clearly, things are changing faster than most of us believe in. So that's really great. And I think what good you talked about the customization part. And I'm often asked this question: will farmer pay? It's like $1 billion question. Will farmer pay? And my answer they will pay as long as they see the benefit. That's true for an urban consumer. I also won't pay unless I see the benefit. So how do you establish that correlation between the services or the data that you are, that for which farmer is paying, and the benefit that is deriving out of it? So whether it's optimization of input cost, or whether more income, or better market linkage and stuff like that. So I think that's clearly that equation need to be established, and I have no question in mind that farmers won't pay. So I think that's
more than 75,000 farmers who are our paid users and who are paying month on month for the advisory. So again, when we started in 2017, everybody was like, nobody will pay. Indian consumers don't pay. And we had been very strong that we will make an advisory so good that the farmers will be ready to pay. And we have been able to establish that over time.
Sure, and I'm sure the 75,000 can become 75 million. I really hope so. So thanks. I'll come back to you, and I'll go to Luke. Luke, you're clearly a thought leader in the food space, and phenomenal amount of work that you have done. My question to you is around the food security. You know, we are hearing so much about the Singapore government's target 30 by 30, as in 30% of the consumption to be sourced locally by 2030. And that's an ambitious target. I'm sure Singapore is working very, very hard on it. But I want to get your views. You know, how do you see food security at a country level, at a regional level, and at a global level? How that is evolving, and especially in COVID times, we saw so much. Supply chains were breaking, and some regions were totally running out of food, and there were a lot of interstate, inter-country transfer of goods which was happening. So how do you see this food security issue evolving at multiple levels, and also especially focusing on role of technology, how technology can drive it? You know, we are seeing so much of demand supply imbalances across regions, across seasons. How technology can potentially solve for food security?
Well, thank you, Hemendra, and it's my honor to be on this panel among very insightful speakers. I think let me give you a quick tour of the horizon. I think firstly, I'm proud and thankful to be from Singapore, but I think I'll really pitch my comments at a regional and perhaps global level. I think if we look at the situation right now, it is not good, but I think adversity also builds the coalitions and the impetus to make things better. I think if we look at the situation, certainly with the initial bout of COVID, there were initial jolts to the food system. And I think, by and large, the food system as an industry, as a supply chain, stayed fairly resilient. It's the human side that, especially for the least well off, the most jeopardized, the most disrupted, was more affected. So I think it wasn't so much a crisis of starvation, but of undernutrition, malnutrition, impact on people's diets. And I think we are in the era of the long COVID. So let me bring out some themes as we try to crawl out of it as a food system and really as a region, encompassing India as well. I think point one is that unfortunately, partly due to COVID, there's significant food price inflation. If you look at FAO's October year-on-year data, food is 1/3 dearer than the equivalent month last year. So for some people that may not be so significant, but for others it can push them to and beyond the brink. I think that Asia, also based on FAO stats, accounts for, unfortunately, a majority of undernourished people. About 400+ million this year's count in the State of Food Insecurity report. And unfortunately, I think about 300 million of those hail from South Asia. I think Southeast Asia has another 50 million or so. So that is the challenge, and I'll expand on some of those issues. But I think there's also great opportunity if you really reframe it. There was a recent PwC, Rabobank, and Temasek report on how Asian consumers by 2030 may be prepared to spend 2.4 trillion more, on food. Would want to, but to unlock the food system's capacity, there needs to be investment by the private sector, perhaps by governments, of US 1.55 trillion, just to meet that potential demand. So it's a big challenge. How do you finance it? Is there a business case? How do we move forward? And all these are projections. Will we trip in the first instance in our COVID recovery? We are talking about, will it be a V, a deep V, a shallow V, a W, a Nike tick? I think we're still trying to call out of that. And that, to me, really frames everything that we move forward on. So just a quick tour of the horizon on some issues that we are facing currently as a region and as a world. I think firstly, supply chain disruptions. Secondly, displacement, impoverishment, disruption to people's lives. And I think that's where the people sector is very key, because governments need to deliver, companies need to deliver for their ESG credibility. There's been the double burden of malnutrition that, as I mentioned, has been inflected by the lockdown situation to perhaps get worse. And but at the flip side, there's also more attention by people to their health and wellness, including nutrition. There's an infodemic that certainly affects the vaccine issue, but also spills over into food and alleged medicinal foods of various sorts. There is One Health human-animal health system crisis that predated COVID, African swine fever, for example. And I guess COVID itself is an example of zoonosis that presumably came from animal species and jump over into human illness. Climate, COP26 is sweating it out now in Scotland. I think that the food system has been challenged both in terms of the mitigation front and in adaptation. Food accounts for 1/4 of global greenhouse gas emissions. The food system, including in Asia, is significantly jeopardized by flood, drought, temperature extremes, land degradation, and all likelihood seems that it will get worse. The question is just how much worse, how fast, and what are some of the second and third order consequences that we haven't braced for or even anticipated. Regulatory capacity. So that's a lot of challenges, more than one seminar can deal with. But I think the gist of it in terms of technology is that technology is necessary, but it is not sufficient. I think some of the technology aspects are more obvious. I won't expand on digitalisation. I think that is a utility, it's almost a factor of production. So the question as a futurist would be, 5G and beyond, what's the promise? Maybe even if you've heard Facebook's rebranding, what will the metaverse hold? Is there relevance for the food system? I dare say there will be. Technology in terms of situational awareness for governments, jurisdictions, as well as for companies, traceability, for optimization, not just of primary production, but the inputs and the supply chain itself, every node, manufacturing. One thing that I've looked at particularly is the upside potential, or at least the policy impetus, the political impetus for more localization of production. So Hemendra, you alluded to 30 by 30. That's just one place's example. I think there are many other points around ASEAN that are also considering whether there should be more production that is near sourced, reshored, as a hedge. Not to say let's pull up the drawbridge. I don't think that's possible, but as a complement to the regional and global value chains. So that itself obviously is highly technological in nature. There's agronomics, but then tech is the big modifier of agronomics. What's the upside potential for urban, peri-urban zones, and also even like broad acre areas in different places to produce more food? I think just one example, I think in Indonesia, if I'm not wrong, the Borneo rice project is being re-explored. Other things are happening in other countries. So that's just a quick survey of the technology. Maybe I'll just mention one more, which is I think there's a lot of potential for agri-biotech and synbio to be applied, but that requires a social license, that requires a lot of science for reassurance of the safety case. And not to mention just your more run-of-the-mill plant proteins, who eats insects, lots of Asians do, perhaps more should.
Right.
So it's how do you onboard? And that would also involve the technology of information and persuasion, if you look at technology more holistically. I think I'll leave it
Thanks,
there.
Luke. No, that's wonderful summary. I really appreciate your pretty holistic outlook. And this number is really it really keeps you, makes you think. $2.4 trillion additional food demand, and the kind of investment you're talking in excess of $1 trillion. I think that's something to think about. I think a very important statement that you made, that technology is necessary but not sufficient. I think it's very important to understand that. And I totally agree with you. Technology can solve for some challenges, but it can't solve without proper policy framework, without proper innovation adoption, without proper on the ground presence, combination of physical and digital infrastructure, etc., etc. So I think you made a very important point. And on the demand side, I totally agree with you. I think post-COVID, we have seen the demand patterns have changed. Even in India, we're seeing consumers are willing to pay price for food which is safe, for traceability, for food which is nutritious, for food which can build immunity, etc., etc. So I don't think demand side is much of an issue. In fact, it is evolving for good. The challenge is going to be supply. It's whether it's climate risk, whether it's the opaqueness, whether it's the length of supply chain. And that's where I see technology solving at least some of those problems. And that's extremely critical. We always talk about farm to fork models in India. Frankly, I didn't see those farm to fork models till pandemic happened. And in the pandemic, we saw farmer groups actually reaching out to consumers directly. So I often joke, it took a pandemic for a farm to fork model to really come into the picture. So, I hope that, pandemic is a good time to rethink a food supply chain and systems. The uncertainties around climate, around the supply patterns are pretty much there. And if technology can solve some of that, I think it'll be great step forward. And that's where I see, going back to startup, I think they're going to play a very, very important role in building those innovative models. And with that, I'll go to Emmanuel. And Emmanuel, you've been watching Indian agtech ecosystem for a long, long time. Not just watching, but making sure that the ecosystem is growing, supporting many startups at a very, very early stage through your mentoring and the kind of support which Caspian provides in the form of debt and other services. How do you see this ecosystem evolving, and what role do you see for ecosystem partners and especially policymakers in crystallizing this ecosystem to a next level where we can solve the challenges that we see in agricultural supply chain at scale?
Yeah, thanks, Hemendra. So a lot of positive happening in this space. I think for a large period of time, the tech in agtech was seen as a soft tech, developing apps or solutions. But slowly the marriage between technology, hard technology and the soft technology is happening now in terms of things like grading at the farm gate level, or developing storage systems which are downscaled and affordable to a farmer, appropriate for long distance logistics and such things. So coming to the question that you asked about policy, basically, I think as you were saying, we have 1,000 or more vibrant startups in the agri space. They have a shelf of solutions available, but how do we get these across to the millions of farmers, small farmers in the country, is the key challenge that is there. This is where I think, fortunately, we have a very robust, both an agricultural research system of over 100 research institutions, many commodity specialized research institutions, and then we have a whole state extension mechanism in the agriculture space. And the ability to bring these two together to partner would enable those scalabilities to happen. Basically, I think a large number of these solutions are not validated by scientists.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where farmers are also a little hesitant about adopting these. And if these really get approval or the go-ahead or the tick marks from the experts on the subject and say these are good, there are no downside risks on it, you can adopt it and help their own channels to propagate these technologies. There's a huge possibility of scale. The other thing about scale is that it brings down the cost. So unless we get these solutions to a very large volumes and scale, I think startups do not have the resources to be able to themselves deliver on these solutions at scale, and we shouldn't hold them to account if they're not doing it at the pace at which it is required to be done. So this is another area where policy makers should play a role. The third point again is the economic benefits of what happens. Let's say, for example, what Sai is doing, precision agriculture, customized solutions, could lead to lesser use of inputs, better use of water resources, improvement because of that, to the health of the farmer, to the health of the soil. All these are benefits which are economic and not really may not come in the market. So who pays for it is a question. So I think as a nation or as a society, the gains that come from these innovations need to be cost subsidized by somebody initially. And that I think again has a role for the state to play and the policymakers to play, of not directly subsidizing these, but encouraging them, providing some way of taking them closer to the market and promoting the adoption of these technologies. And these are, I think, the small gaps, and I believe it's a matter of time. There is a tipping point for this to happen, and we're slowly getting there. But really the climate change or even the various issues of distress in agriculture, we cannot wait. We need to accelerate this whole process. And that's why I think there's a need for policymakers, governments to work very closely with all these innovators who are working in this space, in the ecosystem.
Thanks, Emmanuel. I think very valid points you raised. And I think one thing which I want to highlight is technical validation. Even I struggle with that. You have a soil testing startup who's doing great job in Andhra, but you want to take him to Uttar Pradesh, and suddenly the models start failing because the soil type is different, right? So that's where I see that there's a role for a lot of public institutions to participate. We have, I think, around 80 to 100 agriculture universities in the country, but how many of them engage with agri-tech startups is a question mark. I'm a firm believer that institutional partnerships are key, especially for the validation. And also, if you look at the curriculum, we're seeing so much digitization in agri supply chain, but data sciences is not taught in agriculture universities. They remain confined to IITs and other engineering colleges, but unlikely in an agriculture university. So we need to really look through, how do we develop that capacity at a grassroots level, at a very early stage, through change in curriculum, etc., so that we have enough capacity to deliver. Let's hope Sai reaches those 75 million. She'll need a lot of data scientists, right, to make that happen. But do we have them? That's the question. So I think very important
right now with us. Yeah, but there will be much we have right now with us, but there will be much more needed, many more needed. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I see that it's not easy to get a data scientist in Bangalore. There's so much in demand, and it's so becoming so expensive also for a startup to afford. No, good points, Emmanuel. I'll come back to you. I'll go to Richie now. Richie, TinyHub, we all know, I can tell you when I do a lot of work with investors on diligence, etc. And for any supply chain tech startup diligence, they ask me, give me one example of a global peer, who's like Waycool, who's like Ninja Cart or a Dehat, etc. And the name which comes to my mind is TinyHub. Look at that. That's such a wonderful story. So really want to understand from you, what's the secret sauce for the scale that we have seen at TinyHub. You attracted a lot of capital, I think over $65 million, probably more. And a phenomenal number of farmers you work with, over 60,000 farmers, the data that I have, and catering to 1 million consumer. I think these are very big numbers, and clearly all the ASEAN countries, including India, have a lot to learn from you. So just tell us about your journey and what the secret sauce is.
Sure. Thank you, Hemendra. Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I wouldn't dare to say it's secret sauce. It's really a lot of very focused hard work and constant adaptation. But I think we are lucky enough. The way we look at it as an agtech player in Indonesia, The addressable market size itself in Indonesia is huge, right? $125 billion. We talk about total agriculture. And there's still a lot of upside. I mean, from our point of view, we are serving even less than 0.1% of that market right now. Yeah. And if we, that's only if you look at the whole agriculture, and if we map it downstream to the actual grocery retail, it's worth about $100 billion for the offline and about $1 billion now for e-grocery. And we are riding on that because we are involved in both, right? TaniHub, I mean, we position ourselves as a complete end-to-end. You mentioned already, right? As a supply chain network, it is true. It's not the easiest of things to do, but we believe we need to do it because we cannot just be thinking about let's go downstream or let's fix upstream. It has to be done both ways at the same time. Because at the end of the day, we see that our vision, how we can increase the overall value of the agriculture sector, one of the root cause of the problem is always inefficiency due to imbalanced demand supply all the time, everywhere, across commodities, across regions, right? So we decided early on that we need to, no matter how difficult it is, we need to tackle this upfront, right? How do you aggregate supply and aggregate demand simultaneously? Yeah. So that's why we do both downstream. We serve B2B customers. We serve B2C e-grocery, which is thanks to COVID also get accelerated, yeah, consumer adoption. But at the same time, we go deep in upstream. When we engage farmers, we have a business arm called Tani Fund that actually provide financing, but not just money, but also expertise to help them, plan better their cultivation and ultimately their harvest, which we can absorb everything. And we create that circular value, right? Where, win-win growth loop where, if I can get the best harvest in a consistent and predictable manner, I can serve my customers with reliable supply and really a very competitive cost, which also help me earn the trust of the farmers that, hey, I'm not just yet another big business from the city that try to buy some things cheaply from them, but it's a long-term repeatable transaction over and over again, right? And along the way, when we do this, we are reducing food waste, which is about 50% in Indonesia at the last count, which is very shocking, right? 50% of all harvest is just wasted along the way until it reaches the customers or the consumers. So I think the way we put this positioning and the fact that the market is big and that we are in a way quite the first mover in all these aspects from downstream, upstream, midstream, I think that gives us a certain honor and privilege right now to be like, seem to be leading, but in the big space of things, I will always say that we are still a small startup. Again, we are serving less than 1% of the entire 125 billion market, right? We have much more to go. So I wouldn't call that secret sauce. It's really logic and the determination to really do it all at the same time. Maybe craziness enough.
No, that's great, and that's such a beauty of this agricultural sector. You can still be serving 1% of the market, and you can be unicorn, right? Which other sector offers you that opportunity? And so I think that I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And a lot of startups come to me, which are very young in India, and say, "Look, so and so has raised $50 million, $100 million. Is it too late for me?" I said, "No, it's not late for anyone." Because there's so much you can do, even focusing on 5 crops, 3 districts, you can still make $100 million business. So why do you worry? And
Yeah.
as Luke mentioned, that the demand is going to go at a different level in next 10 years. It's not that you are fighting for market share, but you're creating market for yourself, right? So that's interesting. Another point that you mentioned is really struck me, that 50% of food is wasted in Indonesia. We waste 33%, and I said, look, this probably is the worst number for any country in the world. But I'm surprised Indonesia is also wasting significant amount of food. So that has to change for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I personally see it, right? I went and visit our farmers, and along the roads, I see so much chilies, spinach being thrown on the roadside because it's cheaper to throw than to transport to the cities. That's such a sad situation, right? And it's simply because lack of coordination and planning. I mean, the farmers never know what to plant, when to plant, how much to plant, right? And at the other end, downstream, customers are complaining, when we need vegetables, we don't have it and it's expensive. So it's a broken system, right?
Absolutely. And that's where I think technology can play a role. For example, I'm a big believer in application of satellite imagery. And fortunately, you can capture crop signatures as soon as the crop is out of the soil, as in the plant is out of the soil. So I often tell, of course, sounds very simplistic, but let's say in India we consume 45 million tons of potato every year, right?
Yeah.
So, and say if you're monitoring through satellite, every plant which is coming out of soil, you can say, oh, there's enough potato. Let's give an advisory to farmers not to grow more potato. Or if you're falling short of potatoes, let's give an advisory to farmers, please grow more potato. Of course, it's not as simple. There are multiple complexities. But yes, let's use technology to sort of kind of bridge this demand supply gap, and which is one of the fundamental reason of food wastage, and it's criminal. And the number that I have from Indian startups similar to yours, of course I can't name them, but they have brought down less than 1% in many cases, including the supply chains in perishables like fruit, vegetable, animal protein, which is phenomenal. So there's an evidence that technology can definitely reduce food loss, through its intervention. So thanks very much, Richie. I'll come back to you. I'll probably go back to Anbu again. Anbu, another concept which is emerging very fast is this concept of smart cities, and that we are seeing across the world. I'm sure a lot of ASEAN countries also adopting that format. Essentially, smart cities are one which provide best services to citizens, which are some sort of, have some sort of self-sufficiency. So how do you link that framework with the framework of digitization in agriculture? How do these two frameworks can possibly come together? Especially in COVID times, I don't, what we saw in India, need for hyper local supply chain, especially for essential commodities, because at least for some period of time during lockdown, products were not moving from one part of the country to another. So how do you see this smart city concept and digitization in agriculture? How do we marry these two concepts?
I think here the smart city and ASEAN has this ASEAN Smart City Network. There are 26 cities has been part of this network. They created a platform of mutual learning. Here, when we say about the smart city, it is the application of these information technology and the digital technology and the data to improve the service delivery that could happen in the energy sector, water sector, waste management, or the transport sector. Basically, it is the aim to provide the high level of services at the lower cost. This is the efficiency. This efficiency improvement has the benefit, the co-benefits, like improve the, we calculated for the Chiang Mai city, it is about 17% of the carbon emissions could be reduced by application of these technologies, information technology and the communication technology with the data management. I think the same concept could be applied. And for example, Indonesia, maybe Richie can have the more inputs. They have a smart village program. This is basically the application of the same technologies and also these blockchain methodologies to increase the efficiency. For example, the fertilizer input, and also it is a application of the precision agriculture where Sai mentioned. And also here it is the application of the geospatial data. The difference between the cities, urban areas and the rural areas is we have a vast geographical area, which is very distributed. So that need a different approach. And here where we can use this application of the GIS technologies and the remote sensing. And now most of the farmers have these mobile phones. How these technologies could be integrated, I think that is the focus. And we, for the smart city, we developed 17 key performance indicators. So what type of, under the different domains, how to improve this input delivery and also the output, and also how to connect the market between the producers and the consumers. Interestingly, and we find the smart cities that has been digital platform to connect different data sets, make an effective decision. We find they are much more resilient when during the COVID period, when this delivery or the immediate emergency packages has been delivered, and this kind of cities that has been equipped with the digital technologies, then we found the efficiency in the delivery of the immediate aid, whether it is a health information or the assistance, that is the financial assistance to the affected communities. I think the same concept could be applied, but the problem in the rural areas is we find that we don't have all the size here, and in most of these ASEAN countries, the penetration of this private sector is very much limited in the rural areas. So that need a kind of a different type of incentive systems. And for example, this social entrepreneurs, I think it happened in Malaysia and also some part of the Thailand. And this social, we find a kind of matchmaking between the social entrepreneurs and as well as the multinational companies. They come together for a cause. And here we also in Maharashtra, we find that example of these insurance companies coming together and provide a crop insurance once the farmers' assets are digitalized and it is available for the advisory providers, technology advisory providers. But we do have challenges, and one thing, there are three things when coming to these rural areas or the agricultural areas. And one thing is that it's information asymmetry. And here we find most of that information is available in for example, rural administration, which is not very open and which is not open to the private sector operators or the sub supervisors. And second thing is the technology, access to the technology. Still, we have the digital divide between the urban areas and the rural areas. The bandwidth conditions are quite different, and this has to be tackled. And the third one is the finance. And as I mentioned, and we found, and some of the social entrepreneurs, they are finding a new innovative models like a microcredit, and that could be tied with the social entrepreneurship. But what is happening is what should happen is this timing, and this is reducing the information asymmetry and the access to the technology and the access to the finance. These two things happen simultaneously. And here in most of the countries, on most of the rural areas, in ASEAN and as India, there is a lag. One is that the information comes, then the technology comes, and the financial comes. Then it results in the kind of a lagged performance and are the kind of uncentralized performance. And the third point is also the capacity and capability of these administrators. And here we need to find some innovative models. For example, India has the smart city model and the financing model where every smart city is considered kind of a special purpose vehicle, and where they can go to the bond markets and they can develop their own products and financial products. And that kind of a system we need to think about for the agriculture sector. That is going to be a challenging, but still there is a lot of good cases are available. And here we need to look into the unlocking and the scaling of the science and technology through coordinated policy. And this kind of support ecosystems cannot be created by agriculture ministry only. It has to be supported by the industry ministry and the communication ministry and as well as the finance ministry. And second thing is we need to build a kind of a new governance model for these smart villages. And this smart, we do have a good examples in for example, Pura providing urban amenities in the rural areas. That has been promoted by former president, and it is more or close to the kind of bringing these multiple connectivities together under the framework conditions of digitalizing. And third one is that we need to have a kind of a strategic and basic research to improve this productivity and also improving these rural industries and also agricultural industries. For example, and India has produced the India ASEAN Innovation Fund that is promoting this kind of innovative digital startups. And you can look into the website. It is available in between DST and the Ministry of External Affairs. There are $10 million are available. It has not utilized, where there is India and ASEAN can come together to promote that new innovation. So I stop here. Thank you.
Thanks. No, thanks. I think good you brought this idea of smart villages along with smart cities. I think both have to come together. Really, that's so important. One can't exist now without another for sure. Maybe I can go to Luke, given your point, especially if we look at next, let's say 10 years, typically when we look at agriculture, we look at next 3 years, 5 years. But if you look at 10 years horizon or a 20-year horizon, how do you think the landscape changing? This whole landscape, which is, where we have this climate challenges, we have this demand supply imbalances that we talk about, where we start to see some bit of agri-tech emerging across the world. How do you see the world going to be different in 20 years time, especially from a food system perspective? What picture do you envisage?
Yes, well, I think that as a futurist, it's my duty or my luxury to think 10, 20 years ahead, so we can have a panel in 10 years time and you can scold me or praise me for my prescience. But I think in all seriousness, when we look at the longer term, it really is to identify what are the key uncertainties and acknowledge that things can branch off in many ways. So as a political scientist and a social scientist by original background, let me start by naming some of the key uncertainties. I think one key uncertainty, the litany of the UN system right now is that in 2050 there'll be 10 billion people, so we've got to produce X amount more of food, for example, and so on in other verticals. So will there be, what's the future of population? I think that there's a COVID baby bust. I'm not sure if that's happening, for example, in India, but I think in many countries, the birth rate is really going down, and you can think any number of not so nice things that can happen around the world that may inflect the population yet further. What will people's value, what will the food values, beliefs, and preferences of succeeding generations be? One key one, obviously, is how acute will the climate emergency be? And what will some of the consequences, including those unforeseen second, third order consequences, be of it in the food system and beyond? Yet another uncertainty, I guess, would be really geopolitics. Will there be a quote unquote new Cold War? Although that term is very blunt, and how will that inflect supply chains? Will you end up with maybe, let's say, two spheres of influence where the food flows are contiguous, where food-related technologies are heavily stopped at the border between these two zones, or will it be a more permissive global environment of renewed global and perhaps regional cooperation? So these are some of the uncertainties that will influence the future. And I think one other key one, our premise has been that this is the role of the market, this is the role of the state. I think unsaid in that is that may change. I'm not being ideological about it, it's just an uncertainty. If we are in a period of great crisis in the world, may the state try to step forward, including in the food economy more in various ways, rationing, price controls. I'm not talking about any specific country, but or will it perhaps step back, and also the other thing that maybe is important to consider is what's the role of the people sector that I think other speakers have also touched on, in maybe producing their own food economies, food circular economies at the neighborhood level, at the village level, and so on. So you asked me for answers, I view uncertainty. So that's point one. Point two is I think what may some of the potential future states be? I think that if you're looking at an affirmative agenda for the longer term future, certainly it should be people-centered and it also should be planet-friendly. So as two of the anchors, and it's hard to navigate between the two, and part of that will be a function of technology, but also clever policy and clever collaboration between stakeholders at national level, at regional level, international. And I think the frame that has been bandied about is building back better. I tend to agree, but will it be more of a neoliberal green growth paradigm? Or whereas Greta Thunberg and company are pushing for some form of degrowth, where we knock a few teeth out of the smile of the current global economy and call that progress, perhaps, So what's the future? Then So translating this into the food system, what technologies will advance? I've mentioned agri-biotech as I think one key but highly controversial, I think including in India. I think in general, food science certainly will progress. Perhaps fermentation has a place, including in reducing food loss waste, plant proteins, cultured meat. But the key question here is not just food, because there's a food, energy, water nexus, but will tomorrow's foods be energy friendly, water friendly, and how will those partner technologies and spheres advance? Renewables. If there's energy abundance, I think that will unlock and address lots of our problems, as long as the benefits can be broad-based. Okay, so I think just to round off, maybe a few potential visions of what positive food system of the future, in my opinion, could include. One is certainly smart food cities, and this talk has broadened my horizon to think of smart food villages. I think that what would a smart food city have? Perhaps it would be on an ecological basis, highly self-sufficient, maybe even turn history on its head and be a net food surplus node rather than pulling in food from the countryside. There would be a highly personalized degree of nutrition that optimizes wellness, gustation, preventive healthcare, even if you think more broadly, mood, vocational performance, cognition, and so on through the food system. And if you personalize at aggregate level, you can also optimize and minimize your resource take and make it more highly circular. So that is the summit of this whole thing that we're talking about in terms of Digi, where it becomes a system of systems. But who manages it? Is it Bill Gates? Is it some bureaucrat, arch bureaucrat, somewhere in between? So that's the policy thing that needs to be worked through. Maybe one or two last visions on this. I think there's a lot of upside potential for, if you look at the Indo-Pacific, it's very blue, right? There's a lot of sea. There's a lot of potential for mariculture. And in fact, if there's a lot more global heating, sea level rise, you've got to even live more on the water. So what's the upside potential for all kinds of mariculture? I think people have said that mass algae growing can even be climate positive. Aquaculture at sea, etc. And I think there's even a project where people are growing salt-tolerant rice at sea on growing platforms. So if you think about the blue economy upside potential, that can change your dimension. And one last one is there's a lot of discussion right now in the community about agroforestry permaculture. But what is the true balance scorecard ESG wise, emissions wise on that? I think it's not it's more of a challenge to be proven. I'm for this being explored. And then can this be done to produce food at scale? So right. You might have a future where you have highly self-sufficient cities producing food in place, but also some rewilding, and a lot of the population also not in cities, but in forest areas, in marginal areas, but even helping to restore the landscape through propagating the food system.
Great. These are some brilliant points. I think very, very futuristic. Thanks, Luke, for sharing this. I think my next question is to both Richie and Sai. It seems there are quite a few startups on this call. I think if you want to share one lesson that you've learned in this startup journey, what would be that you want to share on this forum? Maybe I can go to Richie and then Sai.
Right. One lesson in this pandemic. So I think the biggest lesson is always be ready to adapt, right? And because we were lucky that, as I said, if I look from the perspective of the customers that we serve in Indonesia, both the B2B and B2C, I mean, because of the pandemic, the B2B F&B sector as a whole got affected, but it's still there, depending on the segment and the region. But definitely a lot of people, due to partial lockdowns or lack of mobility, will be suddenly just find themselves have to suddenly start to adopt online e-grocery, right? And that's something that is also a big shock, because e-commerce fulfillment is already legendary for being difficult. Imagine fresh produce fulfillment. It's even notoriously even more difficult, right? You have to worry about very high rate of breakages, very short shelf lives, things like that. So, but I think it always starts with how we start with the customer, right? What do they need? What can we adapt, and how we can partner with others. We don't need to do everything ourselves, you know, really adapt the situation. And now that the pandemic is a bit in Indonesia, we are lucky enough that it's getting better. The B2B is on the upward trend again, but the B2C, in fact, is still quite resilient. So we see now an interesting trend where consumers, not just because it's no more COVID crisis, that they are starting to give up online. No, they are doing both. So certain things they buy online, certain things they will buy offline. They will do both anyway. So, but again, I think it's about adapting, right? How do we adapt our operations, our business model, our priority, and you have to do it very fast. Yeah, I think that's the key.
Great. No, that's a big lesson, adaptation. I think most startups are, so passionate about the idea. Sometimes they, overlook the market and just focus on the product than the customer. So that's a great thought. Sai, what would be your take?
Yeah, so adding to Rich's adoption and adaptation part, what I would want to say is there are two approaches in adding a disruptive technology. One is you go and first change the ecosystem, or the other approach is you go and ask users to adopt. If users are adopting, the ecosystem will automatically evolve. Now, by ecosystem, I mean every other stakeholder. So now here your customer can be farmers, your customer can be the grocery shops, like Richie, their customers are, or it can be any other. But first, if your customer is understanding value of your product, if they are ready to adopt, the ecosystem will automatically evolve. And the ecosystem will include, like, all the government agencies, and then state agencies who will make the constitutional changes. Because a lot of people here spoke about how the state has to change policies, how the policy makers, how to identify some gaps and do it. I think they will put value to that only when the user is demanding something, and that is very critical. And that is something, for example, when we started, the users were not demanding on internet technology, but today they are demanding on internet technology. When we are telling them there is an internet technology available, they are ready to adopt. So that is the best way the ecosystem can evolve at a faster pace, where everybody is benefited from it. It can't
Great.
be.
I think, yeah, no, absolutely, especially when you're targeting farmers. And if farmer benefits, it's better that government, regulators, everyone, also build a model which can drive that adoption. I think that's a very important point that you mentioned. And with that, I'll go to Emmanuel. Emmanuel, you have the last word today. What are the 2 or 3 changes that you want to bring in the ecosystem? Maybe policy perspective, maybe more participation from investors, incubators, or debt service providers like yours. What 2 or 3 changes that you would like to see, which can drive this adoption at a different level? There are some studies which says about 10-15% of Indian farmers have adopted some agtech. How do we take it to 80-90%? What could be those 2 or 3 interventions which are possible?
Yeah, so I think all said and done, a certain degree of, there's a cost which all farmers cannot afford. And who will bear that cost, and how it will be transmitted is a question to be answered. And I think one of my concerns would be, too much of money running behind a few solutions. So would we be able to, both as the state and as venture capitalists, fund a significantly larger number of startups than what we have already done so far? The other is, I think, focus on 1 or 2 things. First is, of course, efficient use of resources, both water, land, and human. And the human resources in agriculture seems to be getting to become a very critical part. So how do we bring either mechanization or reduce drudgery in agriculture? These two things haven't been adequately addressed and require solutions which are both acceptable to farmers, scalable, as well as affordable. And I think increasingly the encouraging side is a lot of solutions that Indian startups are developing are going to go global, because if we can do it in India, it will work anywhere else. And second thing is the cost effectiveness that we bring. I think we can outbeat any other country in terms of cost of this technology. So the human resources of India combined with the low cost can build solutions which will work not only in India, but go global very quickly. So that's my thoughts. Thanks so much, Evendra.
Thanks, Emmanuel. I think you again pointed a very important thing, which is mechanization. I think I personally also see, especially when I travel into villages, clearly labor is not there anymore. Even if it's there, it's becoming very expensive, and that's where the farm economics start looking a bit difficult, and that's where the mechanization is the answer. And one interesting point I want to bring here, I'm sure probably some of you other also believe in it, is also the nature of agriculture. It's becoming more and more feminine, especially sector like dairy, vegetables, horticulture, and you never know going forward, even cereal crops, which typically need masculine labor, are going to become more feminine. And that's where, when we are thinking of farmer, let's not think of a farmer as a man. A farmer is a woman as well. And that's where how you design a product, you design a service, especially mechanical tools and devices that you're developing. How are they gender neutral? Are they women friendly? Is another aspect that I think we should be thinking about. So I think we have tons of interesting thoughts, and we almost exhausted the time. But before we close, there's one question that I have, and anyone can take it up. It's not targeted at any particular panelist. And this also arises out of my personal ambition, and I think Emmanuel also said this. How do we build a cross-border agri-tech platform? There's so much happening in these countries. India, 1,000 startups. I'm sure other countries in ASEAN are also pretty active in this. There's so much happening in Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Singapore. There's so much innovations happening. And clearly, as Emmanuel said, a lot of these solutions are global in nature. So how do we make it easy for startups to go from one country to another? Does it need some sort of institutional framework? How do we develop? Is there a merit, first of all, in developing these kind of platforms at all? And if yes, how do we do it so that tomorrow, if Bharat Agri wants to get into Indonesia, they have a ready platform. Likewise, hopefully, let's say Tiny Hub, if they decide to come to India, we have something to offer. How do we stitch partnership across countries, at least in ASEAN to begin with? If anyone wants to come in and give some ideas or thoughts.
I think collaboration will be very important aspect over here. And there are always startups who look for, mutual partnerships. For example, let's say Tanya, who are looking more from the farm to consumer connect. At any point of time, if they want to come to India, there are a lot of companies, lot of different aspects of agriculture are taken care by different startups. So the best opportunity for not just Tanya, any other Southeast Asian startup to come into India will be to collaborate with them to get access of their consumer base. And same is true for us or any agri-tech startup in India to look for a counterpart in Southeast Asia. I think, this is something which we have tried in India interstate. So, for example, we first started only with Maharashtra, and when we had to expand to Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, we tried to work with some startup who is giving complementary services already in that area. So it worked really well. Both the companies then help each other. Marketing expenses, which are very important and very critical when you are new to a region those also gets distributed. And I think that is the best way we can work together with any to go to a new country and launch and work together.
Yeah.
If I can add on that,
Yeah.
I think agree with Sai. I mean, collaboration, but to facilitate the collaboration, just taking an example, because before I was involved in Agritech, I was involved in EduTech, education technology, very different sector, but I was also involved about helping an Indonesian EduTech company expand overseas, right? And what helped along the journey was really a combination of private, like investors, the VC community with the governments and the regional associations. I mean, maybe ERIA can be one of those institutions, definitely, where I think it's about understanding first the basic things, right? What are the problems, the real problem statements on the ground to be solved, right? We shouldn't start by forcing solutions of the problems, but trying to understand the commonalities of the problems to be solved in the first place. So I think that's key. If with that open information for what the real problems in different regions, in different markets, then I think startups by definition are very enthusiastic about problem solving, right? They always jump at problems to solve, and I think we all can come together wherever it may be, right? I think, but the Kickstarter are the people who manage to open up the networks so that the discussions can even start. Oh, the problem here and the problem there is similar in this part. This is an interesting synergy, things like that. Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
I think I see there is 3 levels of opportunity, and one thing is at the farm level, and here we need to learn more about the best practices for upscaling. I think, but we need to also acknowledge the fact that the markets are different, and it needs to be customized, and the countries are in a different developmental stage, and this is very much applicable to India and the ASEAN cooperation. The second thing is we do have a lot of best practices and also good practices that could be upscaled at the cross-border level, but that we need a kind of industry guidelines. There is a sector level guidelines for the agriculture sector and the startup. And here that we need to look at it is how to harmonize the different policy streams. And third one is that is at the regional level, at mega level, and at, for example, RCEP and Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which basically believes in the open trade and the investment regimes. Unfortunately, there is the India is still in the waiting list, where this is other economies are growing, and so this bringing part of this kind of mega trade agreements will bring competitiveness in the long term, where that is the countries and cross-border agreement could be made.
Okay, interesting. Any other views before we wrap up?
Yep, I just wanted to say that there's probably a whole web of potential approaches for startup cooperation and synergy, and as well as the intergovernment side. Maybe just to name one, I think there are different places around that are trying to position themselves as startup hubs. Singapore certainly is one example. I think we have about 3,000 startups, 300 private equity players, close to 200 incubators. Of course, not all are in agri-food. But I mean, places such as these, that bring together talented, driven technologists and entrepreneurs to cross-fertilize, holding challenge calls, maybe having some funding and so on. I think are really one excellent way for people from across the wider region to come together. I think all agriculture is local, same but different, so I think you can cross-pollinate, but then you've got to localize from there. So I think that that would be one channel. Then there are a lot of, I guess, institutional NGO type of groups, Grow Asia, for example, that also try to foster some of this collaboration also in the UN system. I think the key thing is there's probably no one killer model that is perfect to move forward, but as long as there are different models moving in the aggregate, we will move in the right direction.
Absolutely. Startup hubs is a great idea. And clearly, Singapore is one of the very, very active startup hubs across sectors, not just agriculture. And likewise, we have Bangalore in India, which has done a phenomenal job. In fact, a lot of agri-techs in India have an office in Bangalore because of the ecosystem support they get from there. So some very good ideas in today's webinar, and thanks to all the panelists for being very, very open and honest about their opinions. I really like the way each one of you shared your thoughts, and I sincerely hope that this is just the start of a dialogue. I think we should definitely engage more. This is a great platform which ERIA and CIECO has co-created, and we should continue the dialogue. Clearly, the big themes which are coming is collaboration, partnership, adoption, customization. Technology is key, but not the panacea. You have to work with a larger ecosystem for technology to yield results, especially to farmers and the food value chain, and also very, very futuristic view how the food systems are going to evolve. So thanks very much to all the panelists for sharing their views, and really sort of really learned a lot myself in terms of what's happening across the Asian countries, and I hope to continue this dialogue further. And with that, I'll hand it over to Julia. Julia, can you come in?
Here I am. Thank you very much, Hemendra. We are almost at the end, so we'll be very, very synthetic. I immediately take on board the suggestion by Hemendra. The discussion we had today, innovation and digitalization in the agricultural sector is crucial, both for India and ASEAN, for climate change, sustainability, circular economy, smart cities and villages, and much, much more. So I hope actually that this is just the beginning of some conversation that we may continue together with our friends at CIE.co later on. Many, many thanks to all panelists. I learned a lot and it was really, really interesting. And also many thanks to Amelia and Andini who worked behind the scenes to organize this event. Stay connected with us. We have one more episode for this mini-series with CIE.co coming up in a couple of months, where we are going to talk about women entrepreneurship. And finally, I think a QR code, yes, it is appearing. Please use it for our post-event survey. And in case any of you would like to have an e-certificate following the participation in this dialogue, you'll find all the information through the QR code that has just been projected. Many, many thanks again, and stay connected, and see you soon back here at some other event. Bye-bye.
Thank you.